As the world continues to watch and with bated breath in the Middle East, is there going to be a ceasefire in the very long and painful Israel-Hamas war? Are we on the brink of possibly seeing this war come to an end? Or is it just another delay and another false hope that's just going to result in more casualties? We're going to unpack a lot of that today. And we're going to have Matt Ho back in. We're having some challenges getting him on the line here. Didn't want to wait any longer. We're going to go ahead and get started. And as soon as he comes in, Gary's going to bring him right on up, because I know a lot of you really love to hear what Matt has to say, as do I. But first of all, I want to just kind of start off with something that President Biden said last night, because it is related to this situation here. He was at the Democratic convention in Chicago. He was kind of opening up, basically handing off the baton to Kamala Harris, who will make her keynote speech on Thursday of this week. We'll be bringing you all of that, especially as it has anything to do with some of these wars. And Biden did say some things that were related to foreign policy last night, but there was one thing he said, which I think I wanted to highlight here, because it continues a disturbing trend, not just in the current administration, but really across many administrations, that I think is undergirding why so many of these problems in the Middle East and elsewhere in the world keep on festering. And that is because of our mentality and how we see our role in this. Now, you've seen me talk many times, and I've shown a bunch of times over the months what Biden said at a 60 Minutes interview shortly after Israel suffered that horrible Hamas attack on October the 7th, where he said, we're the greatest country in the history of the world, et cetera. Well, he kind of expanded on that a little bit yesterday or last night. Watch this.
Name me a country in the world that doesn't think we're the leading nation in the world. Without America, not a joke, think about it. I'm being literal. Who could lead the world other than the United States of America? Well, guess what? America's winning, and the world's better off for it.
Ouch. Number one, no one is supposed to lead the world. That's not a position that any country is supposed to fill. There is no global dictator. There is no global leader. Many countries can aspire to lead by example, which is what the United States used to do for the most part. And where there was possibility of doing things good. If you can lead by positive example and make people want to follow you, that's genuine leadership. In my view, that's how the United States has its best chance to actually lead, by example, by doing the right things, by holding people accountable, ourselves accountable. When we say, here's the standard that we aspire to, and we're going to hold, some of these other countries who are doing things wrong, we're going to hold them to account. And if our friends do this, or if we do this, we're also going to hold ourselves accountable. We're going to do the right thing and lead by example, so that other countries want to follow it, so that even our adversaries may be compelled just from psychological reasons, or from emotional reasons, or from pressure that can be brought on them, because they got, well, I see what you're saying, because that's what you do, and other people seem to like that, so we're getting pressure from others, so maybe we better follow suit, so because it'll do good for us. But when we do this, and when we say, hey, we're leading the world and everyone's following us, and they're not, and then we have grotesque double standards in so many areas, which we do, then nobody is following us. And then you find that even the great power that the United States genuinely has, economically, militarily, culturally even, we have lots of power. But even that is starting to fail. And that is really kind of playing into this situation here, because we have lost so much of our leading by example capabilities. And then you hear him tag out, as he did on that last part there, is that we're winning. Really? Where are we winning? Because what I can see all around the world is I can see the war in Russia and Ukraine just flaming out of control. Every day it seems to get closer and closer to expanding beyond its borders. I see the war in the Middle East now festering after 10 months. I mean, it's hard to believe, but we're actually rolling toward the 1-year anniversary of this, which was supposed to have been a short-term situation, whatever it is, just been made all the more worse. And it's nowhere being close. They have the situation in the East and the Indo-Pacific, in the Pacific as well. You have North Korea making lots of boisterous comments there, and things are getting worse between North and South Korea, and of course China and Taiwan and the United States. That is continuing to fester as well. Folks, we're not winning anywhere. So it's disturbing when people say at the highest levels that we're winning and we're leading the world, and the world is better off for it, in the face of a lot of evidence to the contrary. So that's the context with which we're going on the air today. And now then, we're going to get into the specifics of what's in the news right now, which is, according to Secretary Blinken and several others, we were close to a negotiation where we're going to get at least a first ceasefire, at least a bridge to one. Here's what Blinken said yesterday.
In a very constructive meeting with Prime Minister Netanyahu today, he confirmed to me that Israel accepts the bridging proposal, that he supports it. It's now incumbent on Hamas to do the same. And then the parties, with the help of the mediators, the United States, Egypt, and Qatar, have to come together and complete the process of reaching clear understandings about how they'll implement the commitments that they've made under this agreement. But the next important step is for Hamas to say yes, and then in the coming days for all of the expert negotiators to get together to work on clear understandings on implementing the agreement.
Now, he's talking about this bridging thing, and just to kind of bring you up to date on what he's talking about there, as opposed to just a ceasefire, they're looking to kind of a three-phase operation here. And you can see that phase one was a 6-week full and complete ceasefire. This is what's at least what the United States is pushing. Withdrawal of Israeli forces from populated areas, and that's a definitional issue there, which has some contention. A release of women, wounded, and elderly hostages held in Gaza, release of hundreds of Palestinian prisoners, a release of some American hostages, etc. Then you get to phase 2 and phase 3, where they want more things here. Here's a lot of the problem with that, is that I'm not sure who's the bigger roadblock to this, Hamas or Netanyahu. Because you look at phase 2 there, if you could put that back up, a permanent end to hostilities, release of all living hostages, Israeli forces withdraw from Gaza. At least 2 of those are opposed by Netanyahu, as we're going to actually hear from Jack Keane, who's going to talk about some of these things with Netanyahu in a minute. But you'll see that Netanyahu doesn't really want those things. And now then we see, actually, if you can now, Gary, bring that other headline up that we had. That this is from, I believe, USA Today here just a little while ago, like an hour and a half, I think, ago. It says Hamas rejects the proposed ceasefire plan that drew hope that a deal might be near. As you see, it says Netanyahu digs in. So the Hamas statement accused Netanyahu of, quote, setting new conditions and demands with the aim of undermining the mediators' efforts and prolonging the war. And listen, nobody's taken Hamas's side here, and they have truly, since October 7th, just been this heinous, murderous group that killed so many Israeli civilians. And everything that happened on October 7th in isolation by itself was heinous and horrible, and no nation on the earth would not have responded to that. Israel was completely within its rights, even though there was a lot of things that happened prior to that, from Israel, and especially the summer before, as we've talked about. Hundreds of Palestinians were killed in protest and at the hands of the Israelis. So the cauldron had been boiling for a long time. And so it was definitely not without antecedent. But the issue, the fact is, when you have a lot of civilians killed by terrorist actions like happened on October 7th, people are going to respond to it. But then the question comes in, what next? What are you trying to do? Are you trying to solve the problem? Are you trying to address the political issues that caused the explosion on October 7th? Or are you trying to do something else? And right now, it appears that the Israeli government doesn't want to solve a problem, or at least it doesn't want to solve a problem where there are win-or-win commit situation, where the Israeli people have peace and the Palestinian people have a hope and a future and even the possibility of having freedom for themselves. That doesn't appear to be on the table. So when you hear that the United States is pressing a ceasefire deal that's going to lead to a permanent end of the hostilities, you have to ask the question, on whose terms? Because that is the real issue here. That's what is at stake here. That's why you have Hamas claiming that, look, we want to have a negotiated ceasefire, And why wouldn't they? Because they are definitely on the short end of the stick when it comes to power balance. So I'm sure that they would like to have one, but they want to have one that's going to have some sort of possibility for them to have a hope. And when you're talking about a negotiations of really any kind, but especially of a war situation like this, it is absolutely essential and required that both sides have to have something that they get that they want. If you don't have each side with a chance to have something that they want, then there is no negotiation, because now then you're talking about terms of surrender. I mean, that's just the reality of it. And I think that's what we have a lot here. And when I say I don't think that the Israeli side wants a negotiated settlement, they don't want a negotiations and diplomacy to reach an outcome where there is any kind of version of a win-win. You don't have to look much further than what Israel's done over the last several months. And that is, of course, when they destroyed an Iranian embassy in Syria and caused lots of friction in there with the Iranians and Hezbollah and some of the Hamas and that whole triangle that's going together there. And then, of course, the biggest one, the most recently, is when they assassinated the leaders, the senior Hamas negotiator in Tehran during a presidential inauguration, in the most boisterous and emotionally sensitive, charged Iranian that you can get. I mean, if you wanted to negotiate a settlement, then obviously you would never kill the negotiator. The fact that you did shows very clearly. And I remember in one show we did shortly after that happened, I think it was on July 31st, where we had John Kirby on still after that saying, well, we're talking to Netanyahu and we're still trying to get a negotiated settlement. He talked about several things. And I'm like, are you serious? I mean, who is listening to this other than people who love the administration are going to think, what are you talking about? We want a negotiation. See, this is why I say American leadership is in tatters, because who's going to take us seriously when we claim that we want to lead the world and the world is a better place? And then when we claim that our objective, and I think it's true, it is that we want to see a negotiated settlement. We want to see an end to the war. We want to see the Palestinian people have a future and a hope, and the Israeli people have security and freedom from terrorist actions, etc. And then our partner, Netanyahu's government, sabotages that by destroying and killing the very person we're trying to have a negotiated settlement with. Now, that was then. That was at the end of July. What do you think is going to happen now if we're trying to, in his successor, the guy who's now taken over, I think his name is Samore, if I'm not mistaken, from the Hamas side, how eager are they going to be to have a negotiated settlement when they see Israel continue to do this? And in headlines today, we've seen, Gary, if you could pull that Al Jazeera headline up there. I mean, you see it still continues on with Israel's war on Gaza. Israel kills 12 more in strike on the city's school. And those are literally every day. So if you say you're trying to have a negotiated settlement, but you continue to kill so many innocent civilians in the process of what you claim is going after the Hamas fighters, then you see that there's no basis for the other side to want to have a negotiated settlement. And that's what we've seen here. Hamas said today that that's not what they're going to do, that they have rejected that because they say Netanyahu keeps changing the conditions here. Now, I mentioned Jack Keane a minute ago because this is what many in the United States, certainly in the West and in Israel, and Jack Keane is a huge supporter of Israel, whatever the Israeli government says. It's how you view things. So now I want you to listen carefully to how Keane's going to explain what things look like from the Netanyahu perspective, because that's important when you're trying to figure out how things are or are not going to work. Watch this.
I think the challenge we have is Netanyahu knows full well that he has thousands of Hamas fighters still in Gaza, and he cannot pull all of his forces out with a permanent ceasefire or a temporary ceasefire that would lead to a permanent ceasefire. He wants some room in there to be able to go back in and deal with those thousands of fighters. If he doesn't, it's obvious what will take place. Hamas will declare victory, they'll rearm and regroup, and at some point, when it's convenient to them, they will reattack and we'll be right back where we were back in October the 7th. That's the reality of what Netanyahu is facing.
So just think about the ramifications of what he's saying there. Here's what Netanyahu is facing. If he has a negotiated ceasefire, i.e. if he does what Blinken is in the Middle East right now trying to do on his 9th trip, if he does what the American administration claims is our objective for our policy, then he's going to have another war. That's what he's saying right there. What does that mean then? What's the alternative? If you don't have that, then the only thing left is the eradication of all of Hamas. And of course, no one can even define what Hamas is anymore. I've been saying this since literally the first part of October when Israel first went into Gaza. How will you even know who the Hamas fighters are? Because once you go in there, you're literally going to kill any male that has a gun. And of course, we know most of them do. And then as we also have discovered, any male, gun or no gun, has continued to be killed. And the rules of engagement appear to be anyone in the war zone is a fair target, no matter who they are, no matter what they look like, what they're carrying, etc. So they're not even trying to identify them. So when you hear these claims that Netanyahu still has to kill thousands of Hamas fighters, one has to ask, okay, who are these Hamas fighters? How do you even know how many there are? Because you remember, I think it was like April or May of this year, a long time ago, when Netanyahu claimed there were 4,000 or I think it was 4,000 left in Khan Yunis. And there was like several battalions left, and they destroyed the rest of them, and they had to go in there to clean them up. Well, what happened after that? Now there's still thousands. No kidding. And when you keep killing all these innocent people, what do you think that the fathers of all the 12 of those kids that were killed right there, what do you think that they're going to do? Do you think that all of them are going to say, well, hey, collateral damage happens in war. I mean, there was some Hamas guys under there, so just bad luck for us. Or what about the family members of that father whose wife gave birth to twins last week, and he went to go to an office to get certification or documentation, whatever, for the birth certificate, I think it was. And then when he gets back, a bomb had wiped them all out, and they're all dead. What do you think those men are going to do? Do you think that they're going to become Hamas fighters? They don't even care what the name is. When you're being killed and blown up like that every day, of course, you're going to do whatever you can to defend and support your family. And you're going to go after whoever's doing it. It doesn't matter what name they have on their chest or anything else. If someone's killing your family, then you're going to try and get retaliation. And you're going to try to defend yourself. So by definition, everything that Israel's doing militarily is not leading toward the end. There is no finite number of Hamas fighters that once they kill them, then they're going to have peace, because that won't exist, because they are guaranteeing with their actions that they will have a perpetual number of people fighting against them until there are no people. That's the stark reality of what we're talking about here, folks. You need to understand that. Look beneath the headlines. Look beneath the claims and the words that are being used to the practical realities that exist on the ground. That is it in a nutshell. Israel has put itself on a path that it will never have peace unless it either kills everyone in the Palestinian enclaves or until we force them into doing something different. Because there's not going to be another option right there. And when Keane says, they're going to have another war if they have a ceasefire, is like saying, yeah, we don't want a ceasefire. We want Israel to continue to be able to kill Palestinian people. Anyone who's in that strip that resists being blown up like this. And that is meaning that everything the U.S. administration is saying is nonsense and has this much chance of success. There's none whatsoever. Because you can't just, again, I keep saying this, but by definition, if you keep killing all the people in there and you don't even give them a possibility of a negotiation where they get anything, then you're guaranteeing more violence and more fighting. And you just can't kill everyone. I mean, already Israel is really struggling internationally. I mean, they've already been designated Netanyahu as a potential war criminal. There's been legal judgments against Israel for genocide. That's already been going on. And you can't keep going down this path and think that that's not going to continue to exacerbate and grow internationally. And we have, for example, Turkey continues to say if things go beyond a certain point, especially if the war expands into Hezbollah in the southern part of Lebanon, Turkey has claimed that they may enter the war against Israel. Again, that could be bluster. We don't know because it hasn't happened yet. But we're playing with fire to think that that's never going to happen. And now then you had last week, I think I may have put it in one of my shows that I did while I was in Europe, you have the people on the Hamas side are saying, we're going to continue fighting and may even escalate it beyond. And if the war does escalate into Lebanon, then it may go into Israel. And you had people, let's say, I want to say it was Thursday last week. You forgive me if the date's not quite right, but you had Israeli leaders in Western media saying that war with Iran is inevitable. It is going to happen. And so they want the United States to come and lead the charge. They want us to go to war with Iran. No kidding. No kidding. That's what they want. But that's not what we want. That's not what the American people want. That's not even what the American government claims they want. They say we want a negotiated settlement. And yet you just see it's like you have many of these people in Israel, these supporters. You have some of the supporters in America who'd like to say, yeah, whatever you said, let's go and attack Iran. Because, men like John Bolton have been just lusting to go to war with Iran for a long time, as he repeated basically just a couple of days ago.
There is a regional war in the Middle East now of Iran against Israel on 5 fronts. Israel does fear Hezbollah's arsenal, which in public estimates, this is an extraordinary number, but public estimates are that Hezbollah has between 120 and 150,000 missiles, which would obviously be enough to overwhelm Israel's air defenses, and leads to the question, if they really think it's about to happen, might not Israel strike first? It's complicated. It's not mistakes. It's the fact that the leadership in Tehran is determined to destroy the little Satan. That's what's at work here.
Yeah, and you see that Bolton still, for all of his terrible, terrible track record on anything about war and foreign policy over decades, just heinous track record, he still gets on mainstream media. He still gets invited onto these big shows, and people still keep listening to him. And listen, what he's talking there is just complete and utter nonsense. He is characterizing this situation as though Israel's just sitting there minding their own business, and there's 5 fronts against them. And this little Israel, this little flower in the Middle East, and if we don't go and help them and fight their war for them, the flower could get crushed. The flower's just sitting there, just trying to just be blooming in the desert. And then these bad people are all trying to get them. Well, look at what Israel's doing. Israel is destroying embassies, which violates every, international rules-based order we claim to support. They're assassinating people in Beirut, in Damascus, in Tehran, just all over the other places in Syria, etc. They continue to assassinate all kinds of leaders. And they continue to fight this war against Hamas, and no matter how many civilians have continued to be killed, they're now preparing to potentially go into southern Lebanon. They're now talking, many of them, about wanting to fight a war with Iran. As I just pointed out, open source. This is not me reading the tea leaves. This is me reading the headlines of the things that they say. Now, when you see one nation that's literally killing people all over the place and talking about going to war with at least 2 different countries, people in Lebanon and also in Iran, what do you think those other countries are going to do? Do you think that they're just going to sit passively by and say, sure, whatever you want to do is fine? No, they're not going to. They're going to resist. So when you talk about wanting to end the war, you have to talk about Israel changing their policies or America changing our policy. And if we don't do one or both of those things, then there will continue to be war. And there will continue to be bloodshed. There will be no settlement. There will be no negotiation. There will be no ceasefire. There will just be more and more violence until one day it probably expands beyond the borders of Gaza. And then now it takes on a life of its own, which could go all kinds of bad ways. It's not just that we could get sucked into a war with Iran. It's also the possibility that a war against Iran could also include help from Russia. We keep going more and more. We'll talk about this later this afternoon, helping Ukraine against Russia and maybe expanding our help, again, giving even more permission to fire Western weapons into Russia now that some of the war is actually being fought on Russian territory, which is just angering the Russian side and giving them more and more reason to do what Putin has threatened to do, which is to give ammunition, weapons, and intelligence support to our adversaries. And if we get into a war against Iran in the Middle East, it seems very unlikely to me that Putin would just say, yeah, never mind. I'm not going to make good on my threat there. I'm just going to let Iran flounder, even though Iran's helping Russia and Russia needs Iran to stay whole so that they can continue helping them with the drone technology that they do. We're going to be talking about a lot of this with Doug McGregor this afternoon at 3:00. But that's what we're facing right now. So without a major change, I just don't see how this is going to play out well for the United States. I can see how my concerns are that it'll play out really badly. And the frustrating part of it is that it's avoidable, because there is a path to where we can bring this war to an end. There is a path to where we can compel the sides to a negotiated settlement. And listen, there's no clean into this. I don't have any fantasies about that there's an easy access or an easy endpoint to this, or that there would not be any kind of a settlement that could be reached with us compelling some of the people to do so is not going to possibly hold seeds for more conflict later. That's possible. But we can't, in the concern that a settlement here could lay the seeds for a conflict later, that we just keep the one going in front of us, because that's absurd. It's counterproductive. We need to be doing whatever we can to end the fighting now, and then continue to engage with diplomacy after that, so that those seeds don't grow into a conflict later on. Because of the violence that's been done on both sides of this already, the hatred among the Israelis against the Palestinians and the Palestinians to the Israelis is off the charts right now. And it'll take a generation or more, probably more than 2 generations, in the best case scenario, to even have a chance to get things back into a stable situation to where both sides have at least a modicum of possibilities of having stability and a future and a hope. But that's not even possible if we don't start somewhere. And that's where I'm at right now. That's what we need to do. And unfortunately, we're going in the opposite direction. Now, one of the things from that President Biden said last night on this topic in his speech there at the Democratic convention in Chicago, I think is important to talk about here. And I'm going to bring up some of this. And Gary has it on the deal where I can let him talk, and then we'll stop it at certain points and talk about it. But first of all, when he's talking about that he had some kind of peace treaty in his mind. Here's what he said.
And we'll keep working to bring hostages home and end the war in Gaza and bring peace and security to the Middle East. As you know, I wrote a peace treaty for Gaza. A few days ago, I put forward a proposal that brought us closer to doing that than we've done since.
Okay, Gary, hold on right there. Okay, first of all, what peace treaty did you write? He said that, as you know, I wrote a peace treaty. There is no peace treaty. I mean, there's not even a fake one that's been drawn up. The only thing that we're talking about is a phase 1 ceasefire deal to get to an incredibly difficult bridge to phase 2, and then a phase 3, which will come later. I don't know. Maybe that's what he's talking about, peace treaty. But goodness gracious, you can't even get to the step 1 because we aren't willing to use the leverage we have. If you really wanted to see peace in the Middle East, or at least stability, maybe even peace is too grandiose of something to even shoot for. But having stability and an end of the war is possible. I mean, it's happened many, many times. And the problem with each of those is that the steps that I talked about a second ago were not implemented, and that we didn't follow it up with good diplomacy, legitimate diplomacy, to try and bring the two sides together to where they could find some kind of negotiated settlement. We always reflected back to our baseline, which was, yeah, we're just going to keep fighting, keep supporting Israel with whatever they do, and we're not going to give the Palestinians any side. So that's basically watering the seeds of future conflict. So our policies themselves have undermined our own possibilities and our own claimed objectives that we have. That's we'll talk that for another time. But now then, we're talking right now about what we can do in this conflict right now to get it to an end. Continue running that tape.
We're working around the clock, my Secretary of State, to prevent a wider war and reunite hostages with their families, and surge humanitarian health and food assistance into Gaza now. Okay,
pause right there. Okay, I included that in this clip here because, listen, this is a campaign speech, and it's intended as such, and it's intended to be purely emotional. Not any fact checkers on the platform there that were telling people who were in Chicago about what was being done there. But that is just absurd at face value, that you're demanding a surge in humanitarian assistance. We're in the 10th month of this war here, okay? We had a humiliation of what he said in his State of the Union address in March, that we were going to send this floating pier and get, tons and tons of support into the Gaza Strip, et cetera, which was a humiliating failure, a disaster. It was terrible. Did nothing. It just spent hundreds of millions of dollars preparation, diverted our military assets in the region, and in the end, just was a complete tactical and utter failure. And then it was shut down. And the reason, I mean, aside from the surface level of it being a total failure, making us look bad, it was even worse than that because it was unnecessary. We never needed to make this pier. All we had to do was demand of our ally, open the damn gates and let the trucks that are on the ground in. That's still the case. So don't tell me you're going to try to get humanitarian assistance to the Palestinians, because there is no try. There is only do in this case. Sorry, I kind of stole something from a Star Wars line there, but it unfortunately is very appropriate here. To this day, right now, President Biden can say, you either open up the gates, create new ones, whatever, and let all the humanitarian assistance in that is necessary for the survival of these people, or the bombs are going to stop being supplied. We're going to stop landing the resupply, et cetera. You're going to do that. Then, and of course, I would do a lot more than that and put a lot more provisions. But if you're primarily worried about the Palestinian people, then that's what you do. You don't ask, and while you're still giving them everything they ask for to continue killing people inside the Gaza Strip. Those things are mutually exclusive. And so when he claims to great applause, and you, sir, there was a whole bunch of applause there, just understand the reality, which is that he's doing nothing. He has leverage. He has ability. He just won't use it. Now, this next part here, I think the last part of this clip here also was kind of painful for me to watch. And I know a lot of other people are. I don't know what it's going to be in that arena, or what the Democratic voters are going to be thinking, but I know a lot of them aren't very happy about it. Watch the tape.
To end the civilian suffering of the Palestinian people, and finally deliver a ceasefire and end this war.
Okay, now watch. He's going to shift here to talk about the Palestinian people. This is the part I'm talking about.
Those protesters out in the street, they have a point. A lot of innocent people are being killed on both sides.
And that's it. That's all he said. A lot of because there was big protests going on outside the building by Democratic people, primarily Democratic voters who have been voicing their displeasure for a long time against what Biden has been supporting by just giving blanket support to Israel to continue to kill Palestinian people in large numbers. And so they were protesting outside the gates. And so he says, yeah, well, they have a point. And then that's it. And then he changed topics and went on in a different direction here. Never said anything about it. And so we're going to do something about it. So we're going to help them. We're going to require Israel to do this and that. And yet that wouldn't even cost you any votes, I don't think. Now, the Israeli people don't want any of that, so that some of the people who have money would do something. They've shown that they're willing to use their money against it. But if you're talking about trying to win an election, you can't just tell the millions of people that you want to vote for you, those poor Palestinians. Anyway, moving on, and then do nothing about it. And of course, you didn't hear many applause even when he said that one line there. But that's really an insult to the Democratic voters who are passionate behind this stuff, and many of whom, like I said, were protesting in front of the very building where he was given that conversation at, because they do care about the Palestinian people. And this is not just American Arabs. I mean, this is just regular people. Me, obviously, being one of them. I care about all the people here, and I don't make any distinctions. Especially the civilians, the Israeli civilians, the Palestinian civilians. Care about them all equally. They all deserve to have freedom and peace and freedom from war. And I want it to end for all of their sakes. But there are a lot of people who don't, of course. But to just dismiss all of your own voters who are protesting for it and just say, yeah, it's bad for the Palestinian people. Anyway, moving on. And so not even offering even a token support. This is the point to where President Biden should have said, Israel is our great ally. We're going to continue to support them, but they're going to have to do some things that they don't want to do, and we're going to require them to take care of the civilian population better. We're going to require them to open the gates so that people can get food, all of those kinds of things. That's what he should have done, and he didn't. Instead, he's going to continue to give Israel whatever it's asking for. He's going to continue to not put any requirements on it, no limitations. And he's going to continue to do nothing for the Palestinian people. And he's going to also try to get votes from his own people by giving lip service to it and hoping that they'll just be satisfied with that. So he's trying to do the least he can to not upset the people who are providing money to his campaign. And certainly a lot of them, that he knows that they also have a lot of votes. So he doesn't want to anger them either politically. And while I understand from a political level how difficult that is for him, I don't care. It doesn't make any difference to me at all, because the people who are dying in the Gaza Strip and in the West Bank, they could care less how the American campaign goes, who wins the election. I get it that the Americans do, and that Biden and Harris do. They certainly will, and all of their supporters do. And at the campaign, at the convention, that's what they're for, to get their base fired up. And so I understand all the realities of it, but I just don't care, because a political reality and a political desire to win an election should not trump large numbers of deaths that are preventable, especially. You're hired by the American people to be a damn leader. You're not hired to win the next election. You're not hired to stay in power. I get sick of hearing people accuse their opponents in all sides of this about, they just want to stay in power. And then that's what you're doing here. And you're not doing the thing that we actually hired you for, which is to show leadership, genuine leadership that benefits the American people, leadership that actually does help the people who have the least amount of power. Like, it was so humiliating and angering when I hear Keene sit there talk about how almost like Israel's a little flower, and these Palestinians are going to rise up and go to war with them again if they aren't all destroyed right now, oblivious to the fact that right now the exact opposite is the reality, that you have this behemoth military power of Israel and this powerless people who are fenced off, 2 million of them, and then another 3 million in the West Bank are essentially prisoners in there, and that they're powerless to do anything to the state of Israel. That's the reality, not this fiction that Keene's talking about here. And until we stop talking about fiction and start talking about reality and why you are actually voted for in elections, to provide leadership that actually benefits the United States. And that's not happening there. Not only are the Palestinian people at great risk of continuing to die in large numbers, but the United States, who you're supposed to be supporting and whose interests you're supposed to primarily be worried about, continues to be at high risk of getting sucked into a Middle East war that could expand into a big regional war, if not even larger than that, especially if it has anything to do with Russia at all, if it goes sour or sideways in that regard. So many bad things can happen because we're trying to play let's just win an election at whatever the cost. That's the reality. And I know a lot of my Democratic friends aren't going to want to hear that, and I'm sorry about that, but it is true. And because we're uncompromised on telling you the truth here, not just trying to make anybody happy, we're going to tell it like it is, and that is how it is. We are risking our own national security, and we're risking continued avoidable deaths by innocent people in the Palestinian areas in Israel. That's the truth of it, folks. And we're going to continue to talk about that. Be sure and join us this afternoon. 3 p.m. We're going to have Doug McGregor. We're going to be looking at the Russia-Ukraine war in a new light, or not really a new light, but in the strategic realm of what's going on. We're going to look a little bit beyond what's happening on the battlefields, as important as some of that is, to see the bigger picture. Because sometimes you look at what's happening tactically on the fight today, and you may distract you a little from what's going on in the bigger picture. Doug's going to clarify that for us today. You're not going to want to miss that. 3 p.m. Tune in on Daniel Davis Deep Dive. And in the meantime, appreciate you guys a lot. Look forward to seeing you this afternoon, and we'll see you then.